Hi and welcome. In this video we are taking a look at the recently released Blackmagic Ursa Mini Pro and in particular the elements of using it as a studio camera. Now we're here in our studio and we've got it rigged up. So what do you need from a studio camera and what has this got that's going to help you? Well, first things first, if you're in a multi-camera environment such as this one, you will want to be able to connect your camera back to the thing that all the other cameras are connected to, in this case the vision mixer. So let's take a look around the side of the camera and have a look what we've got. So on the Ursa Mini Pro here we have SDI out. That's not unusual. There's generally a way of getting your video signal out of your camera. I'm trying to think, on the Panasonic GH5 it's HDMI out, on the C100 it's HDMI out, on the C300 it's SDI out as it is on the FS7, so on and so forth. This is not unusual. So this is linked back upstairs to the gallery and takes the feed from the camera. You get where we're going with this. It can do this in quite a few different flavors. Anything from 1080i up, which is your standard broadcast these days. I'm trying to think if a modern newsroom would have any other resolution. There may be some 4K ones out there. Anyway, here we're working in 1080i as we do across the other channels we work with. So we've got 1080i coming out of here. It does take the full sensor image and take it down to 1080i. That's quite useful to do. Then it can also go up to 2160p at 60 frames. Also quite useful. We don't have the facility to test that here, but it's useful to know. If we decide to upgrade our ATEM system to, let's say, the 4K production, or go with another 4K unit, then it's nice to know this camera will go with us on that. SDI out. It's fairly simple. Then there's an SDI in, which I know has had many people confused about what the SDI in does. Well, quite simply, it uses the camera as a monitor. So if you were to feed a source, if I fed the source from you into there, it would play out on the screen, providing the frame rate was correct. But the way we use it here is whatever we're sending to the vision mixer, we can get a program feed straight back. So if you're the camera operator, it's really useful to see, well, what is in the program. You can also see when the shot is on you. You can see what you can do better or interpret what the director's telling you through TalkBack. Now, as well as that, the SDI in feed on the Blackmagic Ursa Mini Pro also gives you camera control, assuming you're using the ATEM system. Now that camera control is really, really useful. It can control, it's a CCU. So if you've ever seen the Sony cameras that have a separate desk with them that you can, CCU stands for color control unit. So you can alter any color, any cast, and your highlights. If you use a three-way color corrector or done any color correction in post, that's what this does. So as well as that, it can control all of the major camera settings. It can control iris, shutter speed, white balance. It can also focus. On this particular setup, we have a Canon EF lens, so the electronics are through there. It will focus on that. On this particular lens, there is no servo zoom. If there was, it can control that as well. So providing you've got your camera composed more or less right, the gallery operator can control every other element of this. Similarly, it uses the record light as a tally light. So if you're, as I am in this case, I can look around and see whichever record light is on, and that's the tally light, that's the camera that I'm currently addressing. Those features make this camera really, really versatile. Blackmagic had previously released the Blackmagic Studio cameras, which were very good and had lots of different options in them, but the Micro Four Thirds sensor probably let them down a bit, and the form factor meant that although they weren't a lot of money, you couldn't use them in any other environment. Whereas the Ursa Mini Pro, we can drop straight off this tripod and go out and shoot elsewhere. That makes it really powerful. The third port here is for timecode and reference in. Now, the The camera itself runs time of day timecode unless it's given a signal from elsewhere. We're not currently running a signal to it, but if you have any, if you have a whole studio full of Ursa Mini Pros, you'll have to derive your timecode from elsewhere. However, if you are running a mixed setup of cameras or with a device like a Locket that can generate timecode, you can sync the timecode across all of your devices. This is a big thing, and with the previous generation Ursa Mini, there was a bit of griping around that Blackmagic hadn't really taken the camera seriously for broadcasters. It didn't have 1080i. It didn't have a lot of the controls that we expect to see on this one. What we don't have here, which is also available, is the Blackmagic Studio Viewfinder. I haven't reviewed that, but by all accounts, it looks like that might be a really useful add-on if you're using the camera in a solely studio environment. However, we're not here. This camera will be utilised to all the different things that it can do. It will be used for broadcast a lot. It will be used as a studio camera a lot. It'll go out on news stories, and it'll be used for more cinematic things. For the money and for the price point and the usability, we're struggling to find another camera that will give you more options. Sure, there are other cameras that you could use in a studio environment, such as on the cheaper end, such as a C100 or a FS7, but you simply don't get the controls over them at the moment. We've used this as a direct replacement for some of our other studio cameras during our news broadcasts, and the difference between the Micro Four Thirds sensor on the previous studio cameras and this is worlds apart. If we compare it to our older standard definition cameras, which are running 2/3 sensors, the difference is quite large. The advantage of being able to have 35mm lenses on this camera in a studio environment really pays off. But in a studio environment, I can honestly say hands down that I can't think today of a better camera than the Blackmagic Ursa Mini Pro to put in a studio environment for the money. Sure, you could spend a lot more money and go the enormous cameras, but for not a lot of money, you're getting an incredible studio camera that can stay with you for the foreseeable future. It's going to be a long time before 4K broadcast is properly adopted, let alone obsolete. The dynamic range on this camera, we're not really using in a studio environment because we're effectively taking a 16 to 235 Rec 709 feed out of it. We can still use the LUTs, incidentally, on the camera, but it's all controlled back up in the gallery. We've got this camera shown here on batteries at the moment, but for the most part, the power adapter that the camera comes with is more than adequate to power something like this if it was stood in a standard studio environment. If you use the shoulder mounts, which you probably wouldn't need if it was going to be permanently in a studio, it does have the rail mounts, which allows you to put your teleprompter on the front. And the weight and feel and quality of the camera also means that it's not going to get broken or bashed about. The previous Blackmagic studio cameras also were pretty robust. However, because of the Micro Four Thirds lens, there was a lot more chance of you breaking them. And the actual connectors stuck straight out the side of the camera. They were a little bit easier to knock around. Finally, the weight of the camera meant that once you'd got a teleprompter on, you had to have a lot of counterbalance. With this camera, it's nicely balanced. A prompter goes on the front quite nicely. You can see at the moment we've got a matte box on, but the prompter sits out there and we just slide the camera back slightly. Color-wise and image-wise, we're really happy with the image that it's producing for in the studio. Of course, in a studio, you could control nearly all of the factors. So the lighting and the amount of light and quality of light that you put onto the set will generally be optimized if you're in a studio environment. So therefore, you're not needing extreme low light or massively blown out highlights. The way we have this camera set up in a studio environment is we use 2 stops of ND on there because we just like the look of having a little bit of ND in there with the infrared cut as well. And finally, the Xlr Inputs, depending on how you've got your studio set up, we found that audio generally will get sent down another track through a mixer and what have you. But if you are doing a small setup, you can plug your audio directly into the Ursa Mini Pro and it will turn up in the audio mixer as well on the 8M. The Ursa Mini Pro as standard comes with the Canon EF mount, but there is an option for the B4 mount as well for standard broadcast lenses. There is also, around the front, a port for controlling those. So the controls that we mentioned earlier that we can get via the ATEM can also be controlled via this lens port. So if you have that B4 mount, then all to the better. Again, for us, because this camera is going to be used in many different environments, and I don't think we have any B4 glass anymore, we're going to stick with the EF mount, and we might go for the PL in time. Now, in terms of gripes of this camera, there really aren't that many. Mounted on a tripod, it's very easy to use. The buttons are all in the right place, and well, it just works. That's really handy. Getting the camera to shoot 1080i wasn't as intuitive as we thought. Once you know it, it's dead easy, but actually we need to set the frame rate to 50 frames a second before we can set the camera to 1080i. Not a big deal. It's a little bit power hungry. If we're running off VLOX, which again in a studio environment you probably wouldn't be, then it does drain these batteries relatively quickly. On the plus side, although it consumes a lot of power, it's silent. It has this fancy heatsink system in it, and in fact if you look down the top of the camera you can see straight through to the floor. But it's incredibly quiet. That is a benefit. And finally, it would be really great if this camera could generate its own timecode. At the moment, as I said, it just runs time of day, but that one thing would really make a difference to this camera. Aside from that, I'm really happy with it, and we are looking at now changing all of our studio cameras to Blackmagic Ursa Mini Pros. There may be some things that I haven't spoke about, or questions that you have, or tests that you'd like to see run. If so, please do put some questions below, and this will be the first in a series of videos running through features and bits and information about the Blackmagic Ursa Mini Pro 4.6K. As always, if you found this useful, please do comment, and even better, subscribe. Until next time, thanks for watching.